How do we draw freehand in ink a busy and layered street scene where we have lots of very different elements, from architecture to various types of trees and shrubs at different levels and layers, and we have buildings closer and further away, and then we have people also in front and other street furniture such as lamps and seats and bins and whatnot. How do we tackle it? Freehand. Well, as I normally do, I like to start with an element that is, if possible, central, but one where I can establish proportions fairly readily, such as these architectural segments in the center of this tower in Cartagena in Spain. So I'm using a 0.1 millimeter pen for this. I'm using a relatively fine liner because I want to capture a sense of the ornateness of this building. There is a lot of detail, and while I'm still only going to be suggesting it, I do want to be able to suggest as much as I can. So my plan is to use the 0.1 millimeter pen for all of this drawing. That's from this building backwards. But for the palm trees and the other things closer to us on the left-hand side, I'm going to switch to a 0.2 millimeter because I want to get a darker effect more quickly, more easily, and also suggest the fact that these trees are closer by having them a visually heavier way. So as you can see, I'm just being very suggestive of the details. Now, this sort of drawing always starts off slower, so it's important to get these proportions correct because the rhythm of the drawing, the tempo that every drawing develops, will pick up as the drawing progresses. I'll be able to make more marks more confidently as I've drawn more of this. Now, there's a row of lights that follow a perspective angle, and I need to reserve the space for those. I've just done one here. There's one in the center of this main building here, and there's one off further to the right on the street. And then there's another one to the left. So there's four that line up all together. So we want to make sure we reserve that space. See, once I've established these first couple of sections of this building, it's not so difficult just to keep extending that to the left, upwards and down, because I've really sorted out the scale, and so I can fairly confidently block in the next segment and then infill the detail. So now I've decided to go up to the roof and get that done because that's relatively straightforward, not from the point of view of the actual object, but from the fact that there's nothing in front of it. I don't have any space I need to protect or preserve. So, as much observation as I can give. It's always terrible watching these things afterwards, doing the voiceover, because I get to see all the ways things aren't quite as even or symmetrical as I thought they were when I drew them. But never mind. So it's a rather strange tower, this one, that's on top of this dome. It's a high dome, but then it's extended quite a bit more by this strange triple balconied lantern on top. It almost has a Middle Eastern feel to it, which may be deliberate. And so it's a bit of a complex shape. I'm doing my best not to get bogged down in the detail, not to become too exact with the detail, but really just to suggest what's here. The most important thing is to keep the proportions and the silhouettes as accurate as possible. I thought that I'd drawn it a bit too large. When I'd drawn it, the whole thing looked a bit top heavy. But the proportions vertically are quite okay. I checked them after I'd finished the drawing. I think perhaps because the dome underneath is not quite round enough. I think that's causing the problem. It gives the optical illusion of making the whole thing look a bit pointier because it's not spreading at the base just quite as much as it should be. So now I'm coming downwards, and this is where I have to be a little bit cautious because now I get the layering. Now I get objects in front of objects. I get these people who are in front of the lower part of the building. I get shrubs in front of the lower part of the building, but behind the people. And so generally, as early as I can, I try to draw the closest objects. As soon as I can position their heads according to the building behind them, I put the heads in, and then I draw the figure to the right scale. I don't know if I do it here, but I often put a light dot where I want the legs to be when I draw the head, just to help me get the proportions of the bodies and the legs correct. So I've put some of these extra lampposts in, and trying to represent the shadows that we see. Now you're watching this at double time, so if you want to watch me draw this first part in real time, then just use that cog symbol, cog icon, to halve the speed. When we switch to the other pen and start doing the palm trees, I've sped that up slightly to double time and a half, so it's just slightly faster for the second half of the drawing. But this took me 35 minutes to draw in real time, so it was still a fairly brisk drawing, which I think is an okay time for drawing a relatively complex scene. If I was sitting in the street, 35 minutes, 40 minutes, that's an okay time to sit down in one spot without getting too much cramp or whatever, or just needing to get up and move about. So, or if you're in a cafe, it's a great length of time if you have a bit of shade and protection and maybe even a great cup of coffee. So therefore, I think this is a good pace, a good rhythm for this sort of scene. And of course, I am leaving things out as I go, but you can see what I'm doing. I position the people in first, and then I can position the vegetation, the relatively low floral border that's behind the people but in front of the building. And then that helps me, as I move across to the left, position further elements where I need to work out where they end, such as that light pole that's in front of the palm trees. So now we've just sped up slightly as I've switched. I haven't actually switched pen yet. I added a slight amount down the bottom there. And so now I've switched to the 0.2, my Copic 0.2 millimeter fine liner pen. This pen's getting a little bit blotty at the moment. I probably should change the nib. If you watch my video from a few days ago of how to draw realistic palm trees, I'm using all of that here, only just drawing it a little bit faster because these trees aren't the main subject. But the important thing is to realize that palm trees are like a pom-pom. The fronds come out in 360 degrees. We shouldn't just draw them going off to the left and the right as if it's a two-dimensional tree. We need to create that effect that of a hemisphere of fronds, or even a sphere of fronds. And there are layers of the palm trees, and I do want to capture that as well. And so the easiest way to do that is to draw the closest one first as completely as I can, and then add the other ones behind, so that we're not crossing our lines over each other. We can take advantage of negative space. We can take advantage of shadows between fronds and shadows that the further back trees have on them, which tend to silhouette more the fronds of the trees in front. And if we look at the actual trunks of these trees, we can see that 2 of them are basically in sunlight, 3 of them are basically in sunlight, and 1 of them is in shade. 1 of them is shadowed, in fact. And so, again, it's good to capture that because it gives us far more visual interest in what we're doing. And now defining the streetscape. I decided not to put the figure on this bench down in the front here. I thought it might draw the eye too far away from the main area. I thought the figures sort of more in the centre were enough. So now I'm just quickly filling in these fronds before I move to the other side of the street and really the furthest details. So I've switched back to my 0.1, well I have now, millimetre pen. Now that I've drawn the fronds, because they're in front of this part of the building, now I can go back and add whatever detail is behind the fronds in whatever fairly light way I want to. Now the most important thing are these windows on the ground floor that disappear behind the trees. Just doing that stonework and that other. So really, this is where strategizing really pays off. To not just start drawing, but to think, what will I need to draw first so that I can draw the second and third things successfully? How can I make choices so that I'm not covering ground that something else will need to occupy accidentally? It's not as hard as it might seem. Even in a relatively complex scene such as this, it doesn't necessarily mean we start the drawing with the closest thing. And I still prefer with a streetscape, if there's some architecture above street level that can be used as a reference point for the rest of the drawing, as in this case, I like to get that drawn first, because then when I come down into street level, I have a far better sense of the overall scale of the building, both for the ground floor level of the building, but also for things such as people and other street furniture. Occasionally though, I do simply start at the front and work back. But where a building, as in this case, is really the main structure, I find it's really quite difficult to start at street level in most cases. I prefer to start above and come down. Now, I've decided to make this side street in shadow, which it is in the picture, but it means I can hopefully highlight the main building more. That is full on in this beautiful Spanish sun. I realise though that I have just used a lot of lines close together. It does have a darkening effect, so I'm going to have to go quite dark on the shading to get enough contrast to have the building stand out as being further lit. So that's just one of those things. And I add this line because it fills a gap and it gives a nice sense of perspective and it leads the eye further into the drawing. It's important, therefore, to get the angle correct. And just a little bit of hatching on the corner of this dome. And then my Cartagena street corner, I think, is pretty much done. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Well, I hope you found this one interesting. Drawing a busy street scene is a great subject, but it can be a challenge because of all the layering of the busyness, whether it's people or buildings or street furniture or plants or animals, cars, whatever. Learning to untangle the order in which we draw things to maximize our chance of nailing the overall effect is a really great skill to develop. So I hope you have a go at this. Yes, it'll be on my channel community page, but look, whatever you draw and however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.